Hello.
All right, we're all ready to begin whenever you're ready.
Hello. Perfect. All right, so just got the slides up and I'll have Lisa go ahead and start us off.
So just to confirm, is there any other procedural things that need to take place before we jump in?
No, we're all ready from our side.
All right, so just got the slides.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to share the results of the city's most recent audit. My name is Lisa Carroll. I am the audit manager for Team Olympia. And joining me are two members of our team, Joshua Young and Bo Villarreal. And I did want to take this opportunity to pass it off to the city. I know you have a lot of folks on the line, so if you'd like to do any introductions, I'll give you that opportunity now.
All right, or Scott, you want to introduce staff and we can go around with council members?
You bet. So I'm Scott Spence, city manager. We have with us the director of finance, Troy Wu, from finance, Chair, Chelsea Yarwood, also Jessica Sweet, Christy Wolf. We have our police chief here with us. It says Bo, but it's Robert Amata. Also, we have our deputy chief, Robert Hollis. We have Peter Brooks from Water Resources. We have Roger Schischel from our engineering department, Scott Devlin from our public works maintenance facility, supervisor. From my screen, I think that is it.
Okay, and on the city council side, we have Councilmember Cox. We have, looks like we have Councilmember Kunkel. We have Deputy Mayor Miller, and myself, Andy Ryder. I'm the mayor.
Well, welcome everyone. As I said, we thank you for being here. We value and appreciate your participation in this meeting. So if at any point there are questions that we can speak to, feel free to stop us. We also have an opportunity at the end to ask questions. So we will have a chance for that at the end. Before we get started, it's important to note that the PowerPoint that Bo is sharing here provides an overall summary of our audit. To supplement this, we also have a packet of information that hopefully most, if not all of you, have been provided. So we won't be speaking directly from the packet today, but we can reference it at any point if there are questions, and obviously it will have some additional information in there than we will provide in this summary presentation today. So with that, I'll have Bo continue on to the next slide and we will begin. So one of the most important things about our audits is their role in increasing trust in government. So our audits are able to do this because the public trusts our office as an independent organization that provides transparent examinations of the operations of state and local governments. Another role is to help find areas where you can be more efficient and effective in the work that you're doing. Additionally, we're able to identify where you were already working efficiently and effectively. So our goal today will be to share with you and help you to understand the results of your audits and answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I will turn it over to Bo, I believe, to go over some detailed results.
Sure, so we'll start with the accountability audit. This slide is detailing the results from our accountability audit, and the corresponding report in the packet starts on page 4. And the specific results are listed on page 7 of the packet. We conducted the accountability audit covering the period of January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. The purpose of the accountability audit is to ascertain whether the city complied with state laws, regulations, contracts, grant agreements, and its own policies and procedures. In addition, our accountability audits look at whether the city has adequate controls to safeguard public funds. Under the results and brief section of the slide, you'll see that we are issuing a clean opinion for the accountability audit, or in other words, our audit found that the city's operation complied in all material respects with applicable state laws, regulations, and its own policies, as well as provided adequate controls over the safeguarding of public resources. We also have a reminder at the bottom of the slide that with accountability audits, we do not review every transaction, activity, policy, internal control, or area as we perform risk-based approach for accountability audits. Bulleted are the items that we selected for our accountability audit, and as mentioned in the last slide, for selecting these, we used a risk-based approach. A little bit of what that looks like is in the planning steps, we conducted risk assessments with some of the key members of the city. We reviewed board minutes, conducted different analytical procedures, reviewed prior year audit results, and also considered common city risks that have been noted throughout the state. And I'll go into detail on a couple of these areas. So the first one I'll go into a little bit more details on is the procurement for public works. We reviewed the procurement for the 25th Loop Improvement Project, the 2020 Overlay Depot, or the 2020 Overlay Project, Depot Trail Amenity Project, and the City of Lacey Soccer and Baseball Project to ensure proper procedures were followed for procurement. In addition, we reviewed change orders for these projects to ensure that they were allowable and didn't change the scope of the project. And we reviewed the contracts and L&I documents to gain some assurance over prevailing wage rate requirements for those as well. The next one I'm going to highlight is for utilities. We focused on adjustments. We gained an understanding of controls, ensuring that all utility adjustments are over the city's controls for ensuring that all utility adjustments are valid, accurate, and independently reviewed. We then reviewed additional support for some of the utility adjustments to further ensure utility adjustments were reasonable, adequately supported, and independently reviewed. And as noted on the last slide for the accountability audit, it was a clean audit with no major issues in any of these areas. And for any minor issues noted, we provided a separate list for management. Are there any questions for the accountability audit portion?
Don't see anything.
Sounds good. So I'll continue on to the financial statement audit results. So for the financial statement audit, we also conducted it for the period of January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. For the financial statement audit, the objective is to issue an opinion on whether the information included in the financial statements can be relied upon for external stakeholders. And we're pleased to report that we're issuing an unmodified clean opinion for the city's financial statements. This is the opinion you want to receive and provides assurance that the financial statements are stated fairly and are materially correct. Additionally, it's important to note that our audits are conducted in accordance with governmental audit standards. These standards also require that we gain an understanding of the city's internal controls or processes that it goes through to prepare the financial statements for audit. And if we identify a weakness or concern with the process that could or did lead to errors in the financial statements, we would be required to bring those to your attention. For the most part, we did not identify any concerns in the city's process. However, we did note one concern related to the preparation of the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which is also called the CFA, which we consider to be a material weakness, and we'll go over this in a couple slides in a finding that we'll have in 2 slides. And lastly, audit standards also require us to consider compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements, where non-compliance could affect the fair presentation of the financial statements. And you'll see that your report indicates that there were no instances of non-compliance with that were material to the financial statements of the city. Also, the financial statement report in the packet can be found on page 11, and the specific opinion can be found on page 36 of the packet. In relation to our financial statement audit, professional audit standards also require that we share with you whether there are any uncorrected misstatements that remain in the audited financial statements. We have included in your packet a full listing of these items, but also note that we have concluded that these are deemed immaterial or small in nature and do not affect the overall opinion being issued on the city's financial statements. Additionally, these items have been shared with city management, and we're confident that they'll work to correct these when preparing future financial statements. We are also required to note whether there were any material or large misstatements identified and subsequently corrected by management. And as noted in the last slide, we noted one misstatement that was significant in the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which I'm about to jump into a little bit further right now. So for the finding, it can be found on page 16 of the packet. And rather than reading through it, I'm just kind of going to give a little bit of a summary of what it's talking about for it. State and federal agencies, the city council and public rely on information included in financial statements to make decisions. And one of the schedules that is included in this, or as supplemental information to the financial statements, is called the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, or CFA for short. In this document, the city lists out all the federal expenditures from the fiscal year, and our office relies on this information when determining which federal programs to audit. When federal funds are received, government entities such as the city are given a certain time frame to expend the funds, which is referred to as the period of performance. The period of performance is set by the agreement with whoever passes the federal funds through to the city. And specifically for the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is one of the federal grants supported on the CFA, the period of performance was set by, well, there's a period of performance set by the Federal Department of the Treasury for any governments that received it directly from them. That was December 31st, 2021. However, for the city received the funds through the State Department of Commerce. So the city's period of performance was instead set by the agreement that the city had with the Department of Commerce. So while the federal side had set a deadline of December 31st, 2021, the city was limited to the more restricted period of performance that ended on November 30th, 2020. And since this was a shorter deadline that ended November 30th, 2020, any funds that were expended after that point would not have been considered 2020 federal expenditures, since they wouldn't have been paid for with the federal dollars for that part. And because of that, any dollars that weren't expended by November 30th, 2020 should not have been included on the CFA. When preparing the CFA, the city did not rely on the period of performance set by their coronavirus grant agreement with the State Department of Commerce, and instead relied on that other date. And due to this, the city incorrectly reported an additional $595,471 on their CFA. And once this error was identified, it led our office to realize that we needed to complete a second federal grant audit for the year to get adequate coverage over the CFA. And since if this error was not identified, our single audit would not have had adequate coverage, we considered it a significant error for the financial side. Are there any questions on that part?
I've been obviously been made aware of this as we've gone through the audit. It seems like the city of Lacey was put in a very difficult situation where we were in a pandemic and we were told we needed to get the funds out as soon as possible. And it sounded like we were following the rules at the time, but the rules hadn't been completely established yet. So I've gone back and tried to think of what we could have done differently at the time. And it's just when you're doing your best to try to get funds into the hands of people that need it, you expect that the nonprofits that are handling this work are prepared as well. So what do we need? What does the city need to do to prevent something like this from happening again? Although it doesn't seem like we'll ever be in knock on wood, we're not going to be in a position like this again where we're under pressure to get funds out into the community under a short time period because you're in the middle of an emergency.
Sure, and I could touch a little bit on that. So yeah, it's definitely a tough situation because obviously, the city is working as hard as they can to get the funds out timely and everything to any places, any businesses, any people that need them. And that creates a tough situation. And for this piece of the issue, there will be a little bit more of, I think, what you're starting to hit on a little bit later in the presentation. But for this part of it with the period of performance, that piece was set in the agreement. See, as far as trying to avoid it in the future, it's tough. Like you said, this is a unique situation where the city was trying to get out the funds quickly, and it creates less time to do the research to ensure that everything follows proper procedures and everything. So it might not happen again with different situations. And yeah, sorry, not the best wording there, but
Doesn't seem like the city did anything, I mean, malfeasant on purpose. It was just like reporting standards. The other thing that I don't understand in this circumstances is how we could have expected the nonprofit to be on a reimbursement basis only. That would have been basically impossible. I mean, it would have guaranteed the funds couldn't have been spent.
If I can, yeah. So I 100% understand what you're saying there. And I think what maybe we can do is there is a second finding that kind of touches more on, I think, the topics that you're speaking to. So maybe when we go over that, it's possible that just by going over it, that we'll answer some of those questions that you have or concerns. And we're happy to kind of touch on it a little bit more if you have additional questions after we go over that. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
Well, while we're on the timing part of it, it seems really unfortunate that we can't get the federal and state deadlines to be in alignment. And I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that, but the federal's guidelines were much more generous with time than the states are.
That is
sure.
definitely true. Go ahead, Bob.
Oh, I was just going to give a little bit more background on it also. Initially, the Federal Department of the Treasury, they set the deadline for December 30th, 2020, and Department of Commerce set theirs as November 30th, 2020. So initially it was just 1 month before, and I believe it was Commerce trying to give themselves time to wrap up a few things and everything to have it transition smoothly, I guess. But then the Federal Department of the Treasury ended up issuing an extension, and that's how it got to the December 31st, 2021 and made it the bigger gap, where Commerce decided to maintain their period of performance end date of November 30th, 2020 that they had initially started on. So just a little bit more context, and I don't fully know the rationale for why those dates were kept or anything, but
I think that just added to the confusion of everything as well. So
It certainly does.
let's go on, see if some of this can be explained later then.
sure. So getting into the federal grant or the single audit portion of this presentation, I wanted to start with going over the 2 single audits that we selected. So we had started initially with the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and then once that error was discovered, that's when we realized that we needed to get more coverage, and we added in the Highway Planning and Construction Grant. We were required to get at least 40% coverage, and between those two, we ended up getting 96 because they had significant dollar amounts related to them. And for the federal grant compliance audit, it was covered in the same period of January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. And the objective of this audit was to ascertain whether the city materially complied with the requirements of receiving federal funding. We audited the 2 grants as listed in the last slide. So for highway planning and construction, we're pleased to report that we're issuing an unmodified clean opinion over the city's compliance with federal grant requirements. And this is the opinion that you want to receive and provides assurance that the funds were expended in accordance with the intended purpose and all requirements have been largely followed. For the Coronavirus Relief Fund, for that one, we're issuing an adverse opinion on the city's compliance with federal grant requirements. This opinion is based on our determination that the city did not comply with multiple compliance areas within the grant, and the compliance issues for this grant are going to be listed a little bit more in the finding that we'll get to shortly in the next slide. Additionally, it's important to note that our audits are conducted in accordance with uniform guidance when they're federal grant audits. Those standards require us to gain an understanding of the city's internal controls or process that it goes through to ensure federal grant requirements are followed. And should we identify a weakness or concern with the process that could or did result in significant noncompliance, we would be required to bring those to your attention. In this case, for highway planning and construction, we did not identify any concerns with the city's process that we were required to bring to your attention. And for the Coronavirus Relief Fund grant, we identified control weakness concerns that will be included in the finding on the next slide. The single audit report is combined with the financial statement report So due to this report also starts on page 11 of your packet, and the results are detailed on page 32, or the opinions are detailed on page 32 of the packet. And now we're getting into the finding. It can be found on page 20 of the packet, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to Josh.
Thank you, Bo. So it sounds like most of the people here are, or at least several of you are pretty familiar with the topics that we're covering, because you were talking about some of the things included in this finding when we discussed the other one. But I'll give a highlight of what's here. And it is pretty complex. There was a lot of unusual stuff that happened in this particular program audit. So I'll talk about it in the simplest terms that I can, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has as well. I think, as the mayor pointed out, it's important to note that the city was under a lot of pressure to act quickly when dispersing the funds. The point of the program is to assist local businesses and citizens who are being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so urgency was important, timeliness was important. That said, the city is still required to comply with federal program guidelines. And so that's why we're talking about this in a finding today. There are a few things that happened. Ultimately, the city dispersed some federal program funds to a subrecipient, and that subrecipient didn't expend the funds within the deadline set by the state. And the city didn't do quite enough to make sure it monitored what those things were being spent on to ensure that they were costs necessary for addressing the pandemic. As a result, we are questioning $715,000 roughly of the total federal program funds that were spent. In addition, the city didn't include, when you have subrecipients, there are requirements for what types of information need to be included in contracts with those subrecipients and the information they need to be provided. There's also requirements to perform what are called risk assessments, and those risk assessments, the basis for them is basically to determine whether or not the level of monitoring that the city is going to do. Whether or not the city already knows the amount of monitoring that it's going to do, there's still a required component of receiving these federal funds. And the city didn't include all the required information in the subrecipient contracts. In some cases, it used the same date that was provided by the federal government instead of the date provided by the state for what is called the period of performance, meaning the time period during which the funds need to be spent, and also didn't perform the risk assessments that were required. So ultimately, our recommendation is hard because, this is a pretty unusual circumstance. First of all, the city traditionally doesn't have a lot of federal programs where subrecipient monitoring is a major component. And the urgency of this program made it certainly a challenge for the city. So we acknowledge that. Our recommendation is just that the city establish and follow its internal controls and monitor federal program expenditures to make sure that it is following all of the applicable criteria and requirements. The city has prepared a response to this finding. That response is included as a component of the finding. So you can find that there. And in that response, the city does a good job, I think, of explaining some of the things that led to the situation being what it is. I'm not sure if I answered any questions that you might have had or that anyone had, but we're happy to kind of take those now. That's what I had to let you know about the finding.
Well, you can see why the city doesn't like to deal with federal funds, because the requirements to use them most of the times are so burdensome that it's almost not worth it. In this circumstance, the city of Lacey was just being a pass-through to try to get the funds to a nonprofit so they could do the work and use those funds. The alternative would be for us to not use them at all and the funds not have been spent, which would have been the other alternative. And so it's just like, when you're in the pen, it went to a recipient that uses federal funds all the time, and we know those funds were being spent on on things that were necessary to get people through the pandemic. And so it wasn't like they weren't being used correctly. It just, it's like, that's why cities, I mean, and I complain about this all the time. It's like, if it's so hard to be a pass-through to get money to the people that need it the most, it's like, why even have the money available to begin with? But I mean, I guess we need to understand going forward, does it make sense for the city to hire someone when we don't even know if we're gonna be using federal funds like this going forward?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure if I heard a question in there.
Yeah. Well, it just, I guess it's frustrating because,
Yes.
like I said, all we're trying to do is be a pass through. It wasn't like we were expending the funds, and it wasn't going to a nonprofit that doesn't use the federal funds, and they do it all the time. They've been responsible for the majority of the pandemic relief in our area. So I don't know. I just don't know what else we could. It doesn't seem like under the circumstances there's a lot else we could have done. Troy, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been waiting to jump in. I appreciate the State Auditor's Office recognizing what was happening at that time. I mean, we're still in the middle of the same pandemic we were dealing with at the time. And so, definitely appreciate you recognizing that. There's a lot of confusion that was happening at that time. The rules were still being established, during 2020. Rules were changing. We worked very closely with Department of Commerce in trying to get some guidance. I don't want to point fingers at our partners over at Commerce because they've been great through this whole process, but we did get a bit of information that did indicate that they were following the federal guidelines in terms of the period of performance. Certainly recognize what was in our contract and what was in their rules, but we were based, moving forward based on some of that information as well. So it was very confusing. But I do want to make a comment in terms of the dollars we're talking about, in terms of the $715,000. I just want the council and anyone in the audience that's watching to know that we subsequently went back to Commerce. We reclassified those expenditures all within the original performance period. So I think it is important to state that these aren't funds that were misappropriated.
No.
We did reclassify. We are in good standing with the Department of Commerce. We're just kind of caught up in a period of when the rules were in place at the time of the audit. So certainly recognize the importance of following the rules and regulations established with the coronavirus relief funds. But at the end of the day, I think Lacey's in good standing with Commerce. I think as the mayor said, we met our goal of first and foremost helping people and businesses. It's not to discount, the rules are in place, and it's not that we don't think those are important, but I think overall we accomplished our goals as a city in helping the community.
I appreciate that, Troy. Thank you.
Are there any other questions that I could answer related to this? Okay. Well, then we'll move on and we can answer questions if you think of them later. So speaking to what you were actually talking about right just a moment ago, Troy, Tracker is a tool that I think you will find useful for communication with the public. And I'll tell you a little bit about why. So Tracker is a tool our office released early, it wasn't last year before last, that was 2020, I guess. So early in 2020, Tracker was released. There are two functions that it provides. So I'll talk about the function that it provides to the city. One of the things that it does is it keeps all of findings and management letters in one place electronically. So as opposed to having to keep records of those things and dig through old files to figure out if there were old findings and management letters or things from, in 6 months when you're trying to remember, what did I need to do to address all those things? You can just go in the client portal and log in, and you can see all those things in one location. So that's really useful, especially when there's turnover and things like that. The second thing, and that will show, sorry, to clarify, that will show any findings in management letters. The second function that there is there's a public facing side. That public facing side shows findings. Findings are already visible to the public in our audit reports, so it's not like there's new information that our office is providing. However, the city has the opportunity to provide additional information. When our report publishes, there is basically a dialog box that you can use to basically update the status of the finding and your corrective action. So in addition to the response that you've already put in the finding, you can say, here's the corrective action the city has taken thus far. Troy, you talked about how you've made sure you're in good standing with Department of Commerce. That might be something that you choose to include in that corrective action, just to clarify, hey, this is the stuff that we've done to make sure that we've addressed this and we're in the clear going forward. That comes to us and we'll take a look at it. And as long as it seems, factually correct and isn't contradictory, we publish that along with the finding, and then the public can go see what you've done. You don't have to wait a full year for our office to come back around and do a second audit, because normally that's how long it would take to get something from our office that says this has been, corrective action's been taken, and we've affirmed that. So it helps ensure timely communication and increase transparency and accountability a little bit. And that is what Tracker does. And so we'll request that you update Tracker when the reports publish or shortly thereafter, just to kind of give an update on where these are at. Some other stuff that we want to let you know about is that we estimated our audit costs in an engagement letter at the beginning of the audit, and our audit costs are in alignment with our original estimate. We are speculating that we may start your audit as early as April of 2022, but we'll be reaching out and working to schedule with you what your next audit will look like. It will cover accountability, financial, and federal programs, so it will be the same as this year. And we've included an estimate for the cost of the next audit in our exit packet. We also want to let you know that your reports should be getting published soon. I would guess they may get published as early as next Thursday, so a week from today. If they don't publish on Thursday, they'll probably go out the Monday following. At that time, you will be given an opportunity to fill out a survey on how the audit went. If you have feedback for things that we did that worked well for you, we would love to hear about that so that we can make sure we're continuing to meet your needs. If there are things that didn't work so well for you, we want to hear about that too, so that we can make sure that we make changes accordingly. And we're making sure that our communications are good. So we would appreciate any feedback that you have. And I'm going to give it back to Bo to wrap up. He has some thank yous to go over.
Sure. I just want to say that I appreciate the city was flexible during COVID-19. I know this is, the second year that you guys have had to go through an audit during that. And I know it's not nearly as easy. Audits are never easy, but they're even more difficult during COVID time. So I appreciate the city working to always get us documentation timely. I know that the city also worked hard through the audit, including we had a lot of unique and complicated requests, especially related to coronavirus relief or the coronavirus relief fund. And the city worked hard to make sure that they got us everything that we needed for that. And I really appreciate that. The city corrected the prior year finding as soon as it was identified and was very responsive when other issues were identified this year. And it's just very clear that the city strives for excellence. Also, just to hit a little bit more on the coronavirus relief fund, it was obvious working through everything with there that the city's primary goal was getting out funds to the public as quick as possible. And that was great to see with that part. As always, city staff were friendly, extremely professional, easy to work with, and great at communicating with our team. And I know each year, Christy and Chelsea take on the large brunt of the requests that I send out. So I just wanted to say a special thank you to both of them for taking on all those requests. And thank you everyone for attending this exit. Are there any last questions for us?
Any questions from the council?
Well, I don't have any questions, but I would just like to appreciate, the difficult position that the auditor staff is in too, and to assure you that while Lacey takes great pride in the very excellent way that the city's finances are managed overall, it's easy for us to feel a little defensive because I think it was a bit of a shock here, but we're all still friends at the end. So I just wanted to say that.
Scott, you have something?
I do. Maybe this is a question for Bill or Joshua. So I wanted to clarify. So again, we clearly understand the communication and what the finding is trying to communicate to us in terms of financial internal controls. Is there any discretion when it comes, because adverse opinion is your highest level of communication to correct something? And given the nature of COVID, the pandemic, if memory serves me right, we did not get the second round of COVID relief until September. So even trying to meet a performance period from September to end of November, I mean, government's good, but that's a phenomenal turnaround to try to execute and then distribute that type of money. Is that, I mean, could that be downgraded to a qualified opinion? I guess that's the question I have.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as soon as we kind of started wrapping up this work, Bo and DJ, who was the audit supervisor on this engagement, and I had some discussions about what this would look like. And there was conversations about whether or not this would be qualified opinion. Ultimately, what it came down to is qualified opinion means that there were concerns with areas except for X. And when we looked at the 4 compliance requirements that made up this program, there were material weaknesses in all 4. So there really was no wiggle room in this case to say except for, because the question would be except for what? Obviously, the unusual nature of the situation makes that really difficult because we want to recognize that. But there really isn't wiggle room in the standards for how we did this opinion. This ran through quite a few people before it landed at adverse. And at the end of the day, I think everyone was like, yeah, this is pretty clear. There's not really an option to do less, which we would have preferred, especially given, we would like to give the city the benefit of the doubt, but we just didn't have that luxury in this case. So I certainly understand your position and your question, but unfortunately, there is not wiggle room in this particular case.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay.
Anything?
Go ahead.
Nope, I don't look like I see anything. Well, thank you for your time. I know it was a frustrating time for all of us. I mean, we know you're just doing your job as well, but it felt like we were in an unattainable situation if we wanted to actually get the dollars out, because it was such a short turnaround, and I'm not sure else we could have done. I guess we could have not distributed the funds, but then we wouldn't be helping the people that need it the most in the middle of emergency. So it feels like there was a no-win situation there, but we guess we'll have to learn and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Hopefully we don't end up in this situation in the future. I think that's what we can all hope. Well, we really go ahead.
No, I'm just saying thank you. Appreciate it. And we always look forward to working with you.
Agreed. We appreciate all of your time. Thank you for coming today. And we look forward to meeting with you again in the near future.
Great. Thanks.